Okay, thank you everyone, and welcome to the ongoing series of virtual lectures that we have been providing over the last months, and we are going to have many more to come, and I'll talk about those in a minute. I first want to give my thanks to Jackie and Bill Egan. This is the Jacalyn and William P. Egan II Lecture. Bill Egan is a member of our Board of Trustees, and Bill and Jackie might be in the audience tonight. They are very good supporters of ours, and they, several years ago, underwrote a book, and that's the one that we're presenting tonight. I'm thrilled to introduce you to Mathilde Tollet, who is talking about artistic wrought iron in the Gilded Age mansions of Newport, design, technique, and influence. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, and then about two other upcoming events. First, about Mathilde. She holds 2 master's degrees from the Louvre, one in museology and the other in conservation, and she got them both in 2018. She has a BA in art history also from the Louvre. 2018 as an intern working for Paul Miller, who was then our curator and who recommended strongly that Mathilde be accepted into our fellowship program. And so we followed orders from Paul because Paul is always right. Mathilde is probably one of the most popular members of our staff. Everybody loves her, and I want to say that to her in front of everyone because we are going to miss her on the 11th of July. Mathilde will return to Paris, where she has to quarantine for 15 days in her sister's apartment, but she does admit that she is very eager to get back home. And we hope so much that you will come again and visit. You've come to Newport twice. This is a young lady who is one day going to be a very, very important museum professional. And I also commend Mathilde and Sebastian Dutton, who you heard from last week, because they lived at the Scholars Center on the Elms property during the pandemic. The 2 of them all by themselves, but more importantly, they somehow survived because they had not a lot of access to archives and source materials, and yet they both completed magnificent projects, and you'll hear more from Mathilde in a minute. The second thing that I want to mention is next week, we start a brand new collaboration with Hillwood, which is the house of Marjorie Merriweather Post in Washington, D.C., and maybe some of you have visited it. It's a magnificent Gilded Age mansion. And the lecture next Wednesday, July 8th at 6:30, which is being offered to members and friends of the Preservation Society, is A Day in Paris with Marjorie Merriweather Post. So if you are interested in attending that virtual lecture, it sounds fantastic to me, just go to Hillwood's website. And then finally, next Thursday night, July 9th, the Pamela and David B. Ford lecture will occur. The topic is the women who saved Mount Vernon. And anyone who knows anything about the history of historic preservation knows that back in the 1850s, Mount Vernon was on its way to complete annihilation. It had not been taken care of. A group of very incredible women stepped forward, calling themselves the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. The association still is in existence today, and they step by step saved that house, and of course it's one of the most popular historic house museums in America. The story is a phenomenal one. It will be told by Dr. Susan Schwoller, who is the executive director of Historic Preservation and Collections and the Robert H. Smith Curator at Mount Vernon, and she tells a very inspiring story. So if you're interested in that lecture, you would send an email to program rsvp@newportmansions.org and let us know that that's the lecture that you want to attend. At the end of this session, we are going to have the opportunity to ask Mathilde questions, and so you would go to your chat button, write your question in, and then we will let Mathilde answer all the questions that we can accommodate in an hour. So with that, Mathilde, good work this year. We are very sorry to see you go, but we're very, very excited about the research that you've done for us this year.
So can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Trudy, for your nice introduction and very kind. I would like to thank the Preservation Society's chairman of the board, Monty Vernon, and Mr. and Mrs. William Egan, who generously contributed to the fellowship program and made it possible. Welcome, everyone. I also would like to thank my colleagues from the Preservation Society because many persons helped me during my research. And a special thanks goes to Marina Cara, who is curator at the Library of Congress. She welcomed me in Washington to work on Richard Morris Hunt's archives. So today I will focus on the artistic ironwork in the two mansions of the Preservation Society built by Richard Morris Hunt, Marble House in 1892 and The Breakers in 1895. I chose to work on this specific topic because Richard Morris Hunt is among the first architects in the United States to introduce the use of wrought iron in private architecture, in railings, doors, and gates. The second reason for this research is that ironwork is often regarded as a poor cousin to the fine arts in art history studies, which is sad since it is an inseparable part of the beauty of architecture and usually the first thing that you can see when you come into mansions like these. So this photograph on your right shows the bottom of the staircase railing at Marble House. The only ironwork signed in the two mansions and entirely imported from Paris by Jules Allard in 1891. This photograph is really interesting first because it is not usual to find an ironwork signed, and second because it illustrates this fascinating period where new multimillionaires were able to build mansions in record time and import entire ceilings, rooms, many great paintings from Europe, and unique and monumental pieces of art like this creation by a French decorator. The French writer Paul Bourget was really impressed by what he saw when he arrived in the United States for the first time in 1893. In his memoirs, published 2 years later, he praised the architecture in Newport. Another man loves France, and he has seen fit to possess in sight of the Atlantic a chateau in the style of the French Renaissance. Here is the chateau. It reminds you of Azay, Chenonceau, and the Loire. He is talking about ochre courts built by Richard Morris Hunt in the exact same years as Marble House, for Ogden Goelet in the style of the Loire Valley. On your right, you can see a photograph of Azay. You can notice the similarities between the two with the facade, the general structure, the frames of the windows, for example, and the roofs. So he continues and says, a third has built a marble palace precisely like the Trianon, with Corinthian pillars as large as those of the Temple of the Sun at Baalbek. And these are not weak imitations, pretentious and futile attempts, such as in every country bring ridicule upon braggarts and upstarts. No, in detail and finish they reveal conscientious study, technical care. Evidently, the best artist has been chosen, and he has had both freedom and money, especially money. So here you can see the Trianon and Marble House, and you can see the similarities in terms of architectural composition with the horizontal and vertical tripartition. Here, oops, excuse me. The roof with the balustrade, the fluted Corinthian pillars on the central part, the cornice, the frieze, the architrave. And Alva Vanderbilt, whom you can see on your left, after a marriage to William Kissing Vanderbilt, heir of the New York Central Railroad Company, was one of the wealthiest women in the US. She had been living for three years in Paris and was proclaiming everywhere a devotion to French art and architecture. That is why she hired the best artist, Richard Maurice Hunt, the first American architect who had graduated from the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1852. So this painting of Richard Maurice Hunt was made in 1895, only a few months before his death. Richard Maurice Hunt, after 13 years spent in France, came back to the US with the desire to introduce a real knowledge of the Beaux-Arts style into American architecture and arts. In 1889, when he began to work on Marble House, he was at the end of a brilliant career, considered as the Dean of Architects and one of the most fashionable ones in the wealthy society of New York. And just after the completion of Marble House, he was hired by Cornelius Vanderbilt II, William Kissing Vanderbilt's brother, to build the new breakers. He will die just a few months after before the inauguration. So on your left, you can see Cornelius Vanderbilt, and on your right, Richard Maurice Hunt, and the new breakers built in completed in 1895. So these two mentions can really be considered as works of maturity and the culmination of a beautiful architectural career. Let's focus now on Richard Maurice Hunt's background so that you can understand where his artistic inspiration for the ironwork at Marble House and the breakers comes from. His first experience and formation in classical architecture in Paris will influence his entire life. For example, here is the first project he worked on when he was in Paris in Hector Lefluer's atelier. If you compare it with the facade of the breakers that I'm going to show you just after, you can see some reminiscences of this first project when he was only 25. The vertical and horizontal tripartition, the balustrades, and the columns on either side. And when you compare with the facade at the breakers, you can see the exact same idea. So he will be inspired by his experience in Paris his whole life. When he was living in Paris, the city was an extraordinary ferment of artistic creation with major transformation in terms of architecture. For example, here you can see two photographs of Notre Dame, one before 1844 and one contemporary, but of course before the fire last year, because you can see that the spire is still there. So at that time also, Notre Dame was really damaged, with parts at risk of complete collapse, with, for example, the statues missing on these parts. And when Richard Maurice Hunt was living in Paris, Viollet-le-Duc, the architect, began to restore Notre Dame. And what is interesting is that he was also promoting the renewal of crafts in many artistic fields, such as stained glass or iron, especially the use of wrought iron and its traditional techniques. And here is an example of what was made in wrought iron on the renewed doors of Notre Dame. The ideas of Viollet-le-Duc on crafts go in the same direction as the arts and craft movement ideas, and will really influence Richard Maurice Hunt and other architects in the idea of using wrought iron in their public construction and private mansions. You may know that in the 19th century, Paris was completely changing. Hunt was following the evolution of this new Paris with the works of the Baron Haussmann, who mitigated its medieval appearance with huge boulevards and united facade. And here, the transformation in Paris really led to the creation of many hôtels particuliers, mansions, especially in the vicinity of the Monceau Square, like the Nissim de Camondo Hotel, with a renewal of the influence of the 17th century, which is an essential period for wrought iron and inspired this beautiful writing that you can see, and many others at that time in France. And this is very important for Hunt because he will be really inspired by this change, this transformation of Paris. And he frequently returned to Europe and especially France. To give you an example, he will come back five times in his life, spending months and even a year in 1874, traveling, sketching everywhere he went, meeting with his old friends, painters and sculptors. He traveled a lot all over Europe and even further, because he will go to Egypt in 1853, which was really the beginning of this kind of travels in the 19th century. This is a drawing on your left from one of his sketchbooks showing girls doing a belly dance from his travel in Egypt. And on your right is sketchbook with drawings and notes about his years in Paris when he was young. And yeah, the Library of Congress conserved 46 sketchbooks from his entire career, which is very interesting in terms of inspirations and work. He was also one of the first American architects to possess a very rich collection of architectural books from all over Europe. In 1855, before coming back to the US, he wrote to his mother that he had run out of funds and could not get her a New Year's present since he had spent all his available money on books. When he was young and student in Paris, he was even part of a club where they named themselves the OMC's club, so the Out of Money Club, not only because he loved books, but also because he really enjoyed going out, including going to the theater and places like this. Even his apprentices remember this impressive collection. Henry Van Brandt, for example, said it was by far the richest, most comprehensive and most curious collection of books on architecture and the other fine arts, which at that time had been brought together in the New World, and made his book readily available to others. And you can see on this photograph the walls of his workshop in New York covered with works of art, photographs, engravings from everywhere. And he was also known to collect wrought iron pieces. And very important, he was also collecting inspiration with photographs and papers from architectural newspapers. The Library of Congress conserves scrapbooks with many inspiration from newspapers. In the case of ironwork, it's very interesting because you can see some photographs from all over Europe, from Prague, from Italy, from Spain, and from France, of course. I'll show you several in my presentation. I hope this overview made you understand what was his background. A formal education in classical architecture in Paris and an amazing visual experience of European architecture and art. Before going further, I would like to say that about the term wrought iron, it's often misused today. It's commonly used to describe designs in cast iron or steel similar to historical wrought iron pieces, but strictly, wrought iron is iron that has been heated and then worked with tools, and cast iron that has been melted and poured into a mold. I think that this, the fact that we misuse it is that because it's because wrought iron is associated to with the idea of a unique work of art. Instead, cast iron is associated to a serial production. But some of the works I'm going to talk about were cast, because cast iron was also frequently used, even for special and unique designs. Richard Maurice Hunt was working mainly with two important foundries from New York, John Williams for Marble House and Jacalyn & Co. for the Breakers. These foundries were specialized in individual creations, working only on models given by the architect or sculptor. You can see on the advertisement insert that it says artisans in ornamental metalwork to special design. So they didn't offer a predefined catalog, unlike other foundries that made serial production. And they were usually working with all type of metal. I don't know if you can see, but in this part, William and Jackson, it says artisans in all metals. There is a little thing hiding what I want to show you, but artisans in all metal. And the metal were cast iron, wrought iron, bronze, and steel. I'm not going, the difference are very subtle, but just note that wrought iron is hammered and cast iron melted and poured into molds, which allowed a more important division of tasks in the foundries. And also note that bronze, it's interesting because I show you some details on a door. Bronze in a non-ferrous metal, so it leads to a green oxidation instead of a red oxidation for ferrous metals. I'm going to show you this short video because in the foundries they mainly used a technique of sand casting, and I think it's easier to explain it with a short video. So first of all, you have a sandbox. You place your wood pattern in a drag box, and sand is poured on it and then rammed and leveled off. Then the packed drag box is turned over and cob box is placed over it. And after that, the second half of the pattern is placed exactly over the first half of the pattern. Then the sand is filled and rammed tightly. The two boxes are then opened and the pattern is removed. So the boxes are again put back into position and clamped with rivets, and gates are formed to pour the metal into the pattern. And after this, it only need to cool down. So this was the technique that they mainly used in the foundries, and these photographs are going to show you some details. It's very interesting because it's really unique to find an insight into work in a foundry, and it's an insight in the foundry of John Williams foundry. These photographs were placed in a lecture given by William Mitchell in 1914, and the pictures that I'm showing you have been taken around 1897. They are a good reflection of the condition of creation of the period we are interested in. The foundry was organized in separate departments. The wood department was where they created the wood patterns, and then you can see the workers working on the sand boxes that I showed you in the video, and then they used to pour the metal in the box, in the mold. And here is the chasing department, where the chaser removes all the excrescences on the cast. So you can see the details of a man working on a sculpture, and here on doors. And the work in a foundry like this one was so compartmentalized that men were usually specialized in one or two techniques and wouldn't have been able to work at something else. And that's what says William Mitchell. A tub molder might work all his life within a few feet of our floor molder, yet neither could do the work of the other. And these men seemingly have no aptitude for learning statuary molding, which is the highest branch of foundry work. The statuary molder is the kingpin of molders and commands the highest wages. So there was also a hierarchy in the foundry and the techniques. What is also interesting is that in the 1890s, crafts really knew a great development with the influence of the arts and craft movement and really became American in the knowledge and techniques. And he says the William Foundry has taken many New York boys as apprentices and trained them to become first-class foundrymen, artisans, and draftsmen. For those who don't know Marble House, I'm showing you this image to encourage you to come visit this beautiful mansion. And on your right, you can see some details from the interior and this impressive gilded ballroom, and of course the main hall with this magnificent doorway. I'm going to talk about it just right now. I think that Richard Morris Hunt's wrought iron designs contributed to this exceptional development of crafts in the US with ambitious and innovative designs. The doors for Marble House were on the front pages of the New York newspapers. Everybody was speculating about the $50,000 spent in this massive creation. An article from April 26 of 1892 from the New York Times described these doors, which were exhibited at the William Foundry before being placed at Marble House. And the journalist notices its exceptional and new nature. At the back of this portico is to be set this magnificent doorway, which is the finest piece of work of this character ever turned out in the United States, and which is of greater merit that much praised examples of such work in Europe is very patriotic. Nothing like this has been attempted before. The doors of the Capitol at Washington are held to be standards for modeled work in bronze, but these grills are of totally different character, being remarkable for composition, forging, and finishing. In technical terms, these doors are exceptional with a double composition, with the exterior panel in bronze. You can see the light green oxidation I was talking about. So the exterior panel in bronze, and the second one interior in soft steel, which is an exact duplicate of the bronze front with details plated with gold. For some of the details of the bronze front, iron plates were wrought by hand into the proper shape, and then bronze castings were made to give this effect of a wrought iron work, which explains the beauty of the details, such as the delicateness of the face and hair of Apollo, or the delicately twisted leaves that you can see here. The other technical progress is that the gates are set up on pivots at the top and the bottom, are also all the swings in the detail of the panels, because each gate would have been too heavy to be moved, as they are 1.5 tons each, which is very heavy. The aesthetic composition is really balanced and elegant. We could talk for hours about many inspirations, but I will talk about the most important. You remember that I told you that Versailles and the Trianon were the main inspiration for Marble House. Central panels with the ovals with the monogram WV that you can see here, WV, and Alva Vanderbilt, William and Alva Vanderbilt. These ovals with the monogram are a development of a balcony for the Great Cabinet of the Royal Dauphin in Versailles. You can see the exact same structure with arabesques reproduced and enlarged, but also the central oval with the monogram and these twisted movements of the leaves. In the photograph conserved in Richard Morrison collection at the Library of Congress, you can find this same photograph. So it was very likely inspired by this balcony. Also, of course, this radiant head of Apollo, which is the symbolic representation of the Sun King, Louis XIV, and which you can find everywhere in Versailles, such as on the grille d'honneur of the chateau. But even more interesting is the interior panel, which was inspired by one of the most beautiful ironworks from the 18th century, the Stanislas Square by Jean Lamour in the rocaille style, which is also a very subtle reference to Versailles because Lamour himself was inspired by an ephemeral iron creation made by Simon de Lobel in the gardens of Versailles. You can see that the gold and black metals are altered and the leaves are twisted around the fluted columns in the exact same way, in the same kind of decorative composition. For example, these details. If you compare the two, it's very similar. In the Richard Morrison scrapbooks at the Library of Congress, I found this page showing an engraving from the recueil made by Jean Lamour for the Stanislas Square. You can see all these details on the drawings. May have inspired Richard Morrison. As for the gate on the balustrade at Marble House, they were directly inspired by French Parisian models. The gate at Marble House was directly drawn after the grille d'honneur from the 17th century in the Tuileries Garden in Paris, with this vertical frieze and the classical and symmetrical motifs of acanthus leaves and central rosette and a finial on the top. For example, here is a drawing from the Library of Congress by Richard Morrison. And if you compare it with, so here are the grills at Marble House, the frieze at Marble House, and the frieze in Paris, in the center. It's exactly the same, except for the details, the gilded details on the frieze. A great source of inspiration for the architects of the 19th century was a series of volumes published by the architect Antonin Raguenet, with drawings showing details from European architecture, sculpture, ironwork. And here is the model for the balustrade of Marble House from a contemporary mansion built near the Parc Monceau. You remember the place I told you that they were building new mansions. And this balustrade is from a mansion built by Jules Parent for the family Meunier, the chocolate producers famous in France at that time, in 1872, with this classical motif of stylized palmettes and arabesques. And here is a photograph from this Hôtel Particulier. I'm sorry, I don't have another photograph because I couldn't find another photo, but you can see in the details, if you are able to, the same stylized palmette with the arabesque. It's the exact same balcony, balustrade. But most interesting is the interior ornamentation in ironwork, because it's particularly beautiful and unique. For the railing, to place such large and heavy bronze trophies in a railing was really a technical prowess. The railing is composed of 20 important bronze trophies and was entirely made by the French firm Jules Allard et Fils in Paris in 1891. Jules Allard was a French decorator who worked with Hunt on decoration projects and for Marble House. He was known for his beautiful furniture and bronzes. And on his, so you can see the details of the bronze trophies here. you can see that on this drawing, which I found in Richard Morrison's paper at the Library of Congress, there is a sentence saying in French, but I'm going to translate, that he sent a sample of the ironwork so that Hunt could validate the colors of the patinas. This drawing illustrates the fact that the railing was entirely made in Paris, where Jules Allard had his workshop and the men with the knowledge, with the necessary knowledge to create it. This railing was inspired by Versailles sculpture, like this little cherub on the bottom, at the bottom of the railing, blowing in a shell on the back of a dolphin, which is an unusual representation in the classical repertoire, as you can see there, with this little bronze on the parterre d'eau, just in front of the in front of the Chateau of Versailles, which was very likely the inspiration for this one. And you can see the detail of the dolphin. It's exactly the same. And this marine, this theme is also everywhere in the hall, the main hall, because on the lantern also made by Allard, you can find the same little dolphins. The trophies were inspired by sculptures from a bosquet in Versailles Gardens. The Bosquet des Dômes that you can see here on this painting by Jean Cottel. And the bronze were probably made on the, from casts made from the original models that are still there in Versailles. On this balustrade, which you can see in the painting, but also on this photograph from 1899, so a few years, just a few years after. And the exterior balustrade is ornamented with 44 marble reliefs that you can see here, from models designed by the sculptors François Girardon, one of the best sculptors during the reign of Louis XIV. And if you compare an original drawing from François Girardon and one of the bronze trophies at Marble House, you can see the similarities between the two in the decorative details, like these leaves, acanthus leaves, these details on the helmet, the salamander also. And of course, I forgot to mention, but of course the oak tree branches were chosen on purpose because the acorn is one of the symbols of the Vanderbilt family, representing the strength and the long life. Here is another one with Hercules and the Nemean lion. And you can really admire the details of the bronze work. It's really, really beautiful. And for example, this one with an helmet with a head of boar and a lion on the crest. Or this one with a Medusa head. Now let's talk about the breakers. If you don't know the breakers, it was completed by Richard Maurice Hunt in 2 years between 1893 and 1895 for Cornelius Vanderbilt II. And it's one of the biggest mansions of Newport. You can see some details from some photograph for the interior, the main hall and the music room. In my research for Marble House, I found this drawing showing a project for the monumental doors we have seen at Marble House. Richard Morrison didn't use this drawing for for Marble House, but he's going to he used it for the breakers. If you compare the drawings with the original model, it's exactly the same. The original model, these doors were made for the Château of Maison by the architect Mansart, and in 1641, and they are now placed in the Galerie d'Apollon at the Louvre. They were probably designed by François Marot, and were technically close to locksmithing, being made in polished chiseled steel. You can see the caduceus, if you compare the two, the caduceus with the snakes and the wings that are exactly the same. The animals' heads, the lions, the circular motif. And is going to use, he used it for the railing at the breakers. Here is the railing, and I'm going to show you some details. When you compare the drawing he made with a photograph conserved in his collection, you can see the similarities between the two, with the reuse of the central oval and the floral elements, you can see here, and the same caduceus with the wings, the snakes, but placed in a lateral decoration. There is also an inspiration, a direct inspiration, because you can see that the central motif, it was the caduceus. He changed it and he placed a flower. And this flower is directly inspired from another railing in Versailles, in the Grand Trianon. You can see this flower on a photograph from the same period. And on this photograph, you can see, if you compare the two, the same movement of the petals with this squared heart and the beaded motif. Let's talk now about the wrought iron gate, which is probably the most impressive piece of wrought iron that you can admire at the breakers and in Newport. Here you can see it only 4 years after its completion. It's exceptionally huge. We can observe two main influences for this gate. In a drawing conserved at the Library of Congress, there is a note about the Barberini Palace in Rome, which is quite logical, as the inspirations for the breakers were the Italianate villas of Rome and Genoa. And you clearly can see the inspiration in the stone pillars. I'm going to show you. This is the Barberini Palace. You can see the inspiration in the stone pillars and the vases, which was the first idea for the top of the pillars. He replaced it after with big circular balls, but it was the first idea. So it was very likely inspired by the Barberini Palace, the Barberini Gate. But in terms of ironwork, the main inspiration is France. I would like to mention again the Stanislas Square, when you can compare details from the railing. For example, this vase with two handles and a fluted part, this fluted part, which is exactly the same. And of course, the composition is very inspired by the many gates from the 17th century with a pediment. This is the Breaker's Gate, with a pediment ornamented with finials and vases, and a central oval with the family monogram. Here you can read, it's on the other side, but it's Cornelius Vanderbilt. and the symmetrical volutes, of course. The gate at the breakers keeps this same idea of the French examples. Here is again the Stanislas square with details, and you can see that here is not the monogram. Here you can see the monogram, but here's some coats of arms. Coat of arms. And if you have good eyes, because it's not very clear, but you can see that the acorn again in this little part, which is the symbol of the family Vanderbilt. This is the drawing for the breakers. And this is the final design. He replaced the vases with this. And I have already noted that Richard Morissant frequently returned to France, so he was probably also inspired by French creations of the 19th century. And I'm thinking in particular here about the Parc Monceau, the Monceau Square, sorry, with these grills by the Maison du Cros, with drawings from the architect Gabriel Daviou in 1862. And you can see when you compare the pediment of the gate, you have many similarities in the finials, the central oval, the volutes. Richard Morissant made a uniquely important contribution to the renewal of wrought iron in the US by using it in private areas for doors, railings, gates. After 1893, the use of wrought iron is very present in the mansions. He was really inspired by famous masterpieces of ironwork from the past, the grills from the Chateau of Maison, the Stanislas Square, Versailles and Trianon, but also inspired by contemporaries like the Maison du Cros or Viollet-le-Duc. I will conclude with this photograph, which is the only one I have found from the Gilded Age showing an ironwork with people in action. And where we can admire the place of wrought iron as an emphasis in architecture and social life. In the architectural treatise of the 17th century, the authors explain that ironwork plays a role in social life, where one had to see and be seen and participate in beautiful parties. This is also particularly true in the Gilded Age, with all the dress parties like this one for the children of George G. Gould and their guests at Georgian Court in Lakewood. They were all dressed in Louis XV style costumes with a beautiful railing by John Williams Foundry. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mathilde. Wonderful presentation. I had no idea that there was so much of a connection between Marble House, the Breakers, and Versailles, and all these other really famous museums that all of us either have been to or want to go to. So we have a new appreciation, a new eye. And I do want to make an observation. You probably don't know this, Mathilde, but we do. While you were speaking, several, I think, of your family members joined your lecture.
Oh.
I don't know if they are sisters or parents, but welcome to the entire Tollet family. I assume you are in Paris and it's very late at night, and I hope that you are proud of Mathilde and the wonderful work that she has done. So there are some questions, and if you want to ask a question, please direct them to me, Trudy Cox, on chat, and I will then pass them on to Mathilde. So the first question that I have for you is this. Would Richard Morissant have given different options to the Vanderbilts of railings for the breakers? And is there any evidence of different schemes than what we see right now at the breakers?
Yes, of course. I didn't show everything because I have a lot of drawings and options, but I can show you some more here. First of all, I want to say that Richard Morrison was very clever because he was always adapting his ideas to the desires of his clients. And so he used to let people choose between options. He used to say to his son, if they want you to build a house upside down, standing on its chimney, it's up to you to do it and still get the best result possible. So he was offering options to his clients and probably options to the Vanderbilts. The drawings I have for the breakers are very similar to the ones I showed you, but I can show you something very interesting about what I said about the importance given to the staircase in the social representation, because he made many different drawings for the breakers, for example, for the staircase. For example, at first, the stairs were placed just at the end of the entrance, but on the other side, with 2 ramps. He also did a design with the staircase placed just in front of the entrance. And my favorite is this one, where he did a circular entrance just after the carriage porch. And I think that's very interesting because it was probably inspired also by a French chateau. He visited these chateaus. It's the Chateau of Chantilly, owned by the Duc d'Aumale, and he was a good friend of the Duc d'Aumale. He went there in his last travel to Paris in 1889, and he really enjoyed his visit. He was with the Vanderbilt, actually, with not Cornelius, but George Vanderbilt. And he went there and he really enjoyed this styling, because I found some drawings where we can see some inspiration from this writing. So it was probably inspired by many other places. And this is another interesting drawing with lions, because I told you that the first inspiration for the breakers were the Italianate villas in Italy. And this is the only example I found of lions just on the steps like this. This is an Italian example. An Italian example from Rome in the Plaza Hotel. In the Plaza Hotel, I'm pretty sure that Richard Morrison went there and saw this lion caught by Canova. So you have many other inspiration, like he was also a very good friend of a French sculptor named Barry, and he was probably influenced by his work to design this option for the breakers with the lions sitting on each side. And this is at the Louvre by his friend Barry. And the last one, just to finish, this one is also very interesting. It's at, it was a great, when he used to go to Paris, he used to go to the Opéra Garnier, and he made a drawing really similar to what you can see in the stairs at the Opéra Garnier. So yes, you can find many other different drawings, but I couldn't speak about everything.
Okay, we have a lot of questions, Mathilde. So I hope I can get to all of them. There is a lot of animal imagery in this art: snakes, rams, aquatic life. Did this come from Greek Roman mythology, and does it have any special symbolism?
Yes, of course. Especially for example, the railings at the railing at Marble House, you have, of course, animals and a mythological meaning about it. Like, for example, you have mythological scenes that are usually associated to the war, to the theme of the war and the sea, because Marble House was just next by the sea. So yeah, you always can find some mythological signification. And sometimes it only has a decorative function. And I think that, for example, for Marble House, the meaning of the mythological scene is a little bit disconnected from the original model, because, for example, the trophies were designed for the glory of the monarch, so for Louis the 14th, and in Marble House it doesn't have the same signification. But
one of the questions that has come in is, why would Hunt not have used bronze instead of iron so that he would gain a patina over time and not have to paint?
That's a very good question, actually. I can't entirely answer this question. I think it's a choice related to this influence of wrought iron works from other period, like wrought iron from the 17th, 18th century. That's probably why, but it's a very good question, because in United States, well, the first thing that was used for this kind of work was bronze, because it was really used in the foundries. And for example, the first doors in the United States were the doors of the Capitol in Washington, and they were made of bronze. So probably because of this tradition of wrought iron.
Okay, great. So there is someone who wants to know whether it was common to use initials on gates. And she observes too that at another house, the wife's initials were used instead of the husband's. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Excuse me, I didn't understand the end about wives and...
At another house, Salzburg, I think she said, the wife's name initials were used, not the husband's. Was that unusual? Usual? Did it matter whether it was the wife or the husband who got his or her initials on a gate? And was that common? Were most gates initialized?
Actually, about the gates, yes, in France it was really common to see initials in the railings, in the gates. I showed you some details of the Stanislas Square showing the initials of the king, 2L here. But I think that in the 17th and 18th century in France, it was not very common to find the initials of the wife. It depends, because, for example, you can find some works with the, I don't know if iron works, but you can find the initials of Diane de Poitiers, who was a very powerful woman. And so sometimes you can find, yes, initial from the woman, and it's especially true, for example, for Marble House, where you can find the Alva's initials everywhere, because she was really implicated in the project. So that's why.
One of the questions is, when looking at ironwork, how do you distinguish between wrought iron and cast metal?
I was sure about that someone was going to ask this. Actually, it's wrought iron. You can see a grain on wrought iron, like on a wood, for example. It's very subtle, but you can see it. And you can also see that wrought iron, you have some, you can see that it was wrought and worked because it's not very regular. And cast iron, it's usually very regular. You can see, yeah, it's usually very regular because molded. So that can help to make the difference, but sometimes it's very difficult because they used, for example, I talked about the doors at Marble House. They use the technique to make as if it was a wrought iron work. So sometimes it's difficult.
Another question, Mathilde, is would they buy the old casts from the originals or just copy them?
For which cast, for example, like the yeah, actually, about the railing at Marble House, for example, my guess is that Jules Allard was allowed to make his own casts on the casts made on the sculptures at Versailles. But this is like in an hypothesis, because sometimes they could, yes, buy some casts and make their own bronzes or works on them. So it depends. For this particular case, I think that he was allowed to make his own cast on the original sculpture.
Here is another question. How do you differentiate between inspiration from a particular source and general style of the time? And then the writer goes on to say, though, of course, the Vanderbilt set the style.
Yeah, that's a good question also. For example, for the gate at the Breakers, I think that it's more a general inspiration, a mix of many gates in France and many examples, even in England, because this kind of gates, you could find this kind of gates in England, in cast iron. So how distinguish? Sometimes we have evidences with archives, like all the comparison I showed you, they were made on evidences from the archives, because I found drawings of reference, and that's the way. But yeah, sometimes it's general inspiration.
Great, thank you. And one or two more questions. We are coming to an end. Did Allard work often with Richard Morris Hunt? And can you give some examples of sites that people could visit that show the work of both Richard Morris Hunt and Jules Allard working together?
Yes, of course. For example, Jules Allard worked with Richard Morris Hunt for Ochre Court in Newport. And I don't know if we're allowed to come in, but sometimes you can come in Ochre Court, which is the Salve Regina University now. And Allard worked in this house. And for example, this was not designed by Allard, but this is the ironwork in Ochre Court, which is very interesting because the ironwork with dolphins like this and balusters, and it was inspired by the French Renaissance, by drawings from the Château de Blois. But yeah, about Allard worked at Ochre Court, and he also worked at the Elms. So go go to the Elms and visit the Elms. And for many other works, he worked with Richard Morrison on projects in New York, but some of them were destroyed and replaced. So.
And
yeah.
one last question. I'm not sure if this is correct, but one of our viewers asks if the B in the gate at the breakers stands for the breakers. And I have to admit, I don't think I have ever seen a B initial. I've seen CV, but
Yes.
not B. So
exactly.
And
yeah, you're right. It's very interesting. Actually, the B is not standing anymore. It's so the B was, there is a design showing the B. Yeah, this design. You can see clearly the B for the breakers.
Yeah.
But then he did another design with acorns, and nowadays it's some acorns in this part, this little oval. So no, that's standing.
Mary Alden, you win the prize for being the most observant tonight. I hope that you will all join me in giving a virtual round of applause to Mathilde. And I really appreciate your family from France tuning in, because I know it's very late at night. And we wish you a very safe trip back. But most of all, I want everybody to remember Mathilde Tollet. She is going to be a famous art historian or museum director someday in her future, and I hope you will credit some of your success to your time in Newport working for the Preservation Society. You've done a wonderful job. Bravo.
So much, Trudy. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you next Wednesday night for the Hillwood Lecture, and also on Thursday night for the Mount Vernon Lecture. Good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.